us the great philosophical question of our day: is this gay? This presentation will mostly be covering a deep dive I did through my own life archive. Those of you who know some of my work might know I'm pretty fond of digging through like a lot of dusty old records of someone online, or dusty old court records, or just digging up a lot of embarrassing information about people that they don't want to find but that I think is relevant. I figure turnabout's fair play. And so I dug up a bunch of embarrassing information about myself that I think is nonetheless relevant to some interesting things. Throughout a few times, I will be asking questions about if something is gay. Now, there is a correct answer. The correct answer is usually no. But feel free to raise your hands or not when you're posed with the question at various times. For example, is a picture of a wolf howling at a rainbow gay? No. Okay. Anyway, before we dive into my personal story, there's a completely unrelated anecdote from psychology that I want to talk about. And this is split brain experiments with some epilepsy patients whose the hemispheres of their brain have been severed. Researchers ran tests on these patients to look at the effects of this hemispheric split. And some of the tests showed one picture to one hemisphere and another picture to another hemisphere, and asked them to choose something related to those pictures. In a famous experiment, they had a person look at like snow with one and a chicken foot with another, and then the person pointed to with one hand a shovel and with the other hand to a chicken. When asked why, the person didn't actually physically register that they had seen this snow. They only registered that they had seen this chicken foot, at least verbally. They could only explain verbally that they had seen this chicken foot, based on the split brain, one going to nonverbal, one going to verbal. And what would happen is they would say, I pointed to this chicken because there was a chicken foot there. And then I pointed to this shovel because you need a shovel to muck out the chicken coop. Now, this has no relevance whatsoever to any of us who do not have split brains, because none of us would ever confabulate explanations after the fact for feelings we did not understand and could not properly attribute. Anyway, at the start of this year, I embarked on a somewhat ambitious project, which was find almost every word I have ever written and compile them into an archive. These are my childhood journals, the journals my mom kept for me, my school assignments, the forum posts I made when I was 12 on a Pokemon forum, my Reddit posts, my Twitter history, around 7 million words, all told, that I had written throughout my life. And I was doing this for a few reasons. I was curious about it. But one of the things is that there's a question that I wanted to answer about myself, and it had nothing to do with homosexuality. For those who don't know, I am a gay man. I'm married to a man, very happily married. We've been married for about 4 years, and I thought that I was pretty settled in this. But I need to give some more context on my life with all this. See, I grew up Mormon, and I wasn't like go to church once a year, like half-baked, whatever. I was in the heart of Utah Valley, a very, very devout Mormon my whole life. Everyone around me was Mormon. I didn't realize the majority of the world wasn't Mormon until I was about 10, 11 years old. I just sort of assumed that Mormonism was the default for everyone. I loved my family. I loved my culture. I took it all very, very seriously. And it defined my entire framework and my entire worldview for a very long time. And within that frame, I did not ever think of myself as gay. I did not notice consciously an attraction to men. I did not think of myself as being anything at all. I thought, I was asexual. And I thought sexuality, that's something for other people to worry about. I don't want to think about it. I don't like it. I don't care about it. It's a very, very small part of my life, completely irrelevant to anything. And that is the way I lived and functioned until I left Mormonism. And gradually after I left Mormonism, I started dating men, started experimenting, whatever, and was like, okay, maybe I have some vague sort of interest in guys, sort of. But I never really got what people were talking about when they talked about sexuality. I really didn't. I knew, like, when people said they were straight, like attracted to women, when they said they could fall in love with people, all of that, I was like, maybe sort of. And eventually I sort of felt my way towards it and met someone who I fell in love with and was like, okay, so this sort of counts, I guess, but it's not like gay. Like, of course I'm dating a man and I love him and he's cute and everything, but this doesn't mean like I'm attracted to men exactly, right? It just means that like I happen to be attracted to this one particular man for individual particularized reasons that have nothing to do with much of anything. And this is the story I told myself through most of my life. It was only as I was going through my life archive for other reasons that I started to wonder if there might have been a little something more going on. This was, 3.5, 4 years after I married a man. I'm starting to think, wait, was I gay this whole time? But it didn't start with this question of, am I gay? It started with a question that I think a lot of people who have encountered some of my more serious work wonder, which is, what on earth is up with that furry thing? Which is, why is this guy who sometimes talks about education policy and sometimes does investigative journalism and sometimes does all of these other ostensibly serious things, why does he go around LARPing as a golden jackal and wearing ears? Like, what is up with that? And the truth is, I didn't actually know what was up with that. I knew I had loved wolves for a long time, but I didn't know why. I didn't know what was going on there. I didn't know like the origin of it or anything like that. And I'm like, look, if I'm looking through my whole archive, I can at least answer this question and figure out why on earth. Because when you look at my writing as a teenager, I am obsessed with wolves throughout. And I'm like, what was with this obsession? What was going on? Why was I so focused on wolves? And so I was trying to outline it and trying to make this rigorous, careful thing about it. And it had very little to do with sexuality until things started creeping in. Anyway, before we get to the weird stuff, right? You can see the journal my mom kept for me as a kid where she's sharing charming anecdotes. I've always been, it turns out, a bit of an attention seeker. When I was 1 year old, I would grab my grandpa and drag him over to the stairs and climb up on a staircase and be like, watch! And then I would jump off the staircase and he would clap and I would, just one of those charming little childhood anecdotes. But I think I've kind of been doing that a lot throughout my life. Jump up on a stage, say, watch, and then do something silly and see what happens. But I started writing pretty early on. And this is the first book that I ever wrote called The Lizard Who Lost Its Tail. About a lizard who lost its tail. A lizard who lost its tail. And the lizard's tail grew back, but not as long as it wanted to. And so then the lizard walked on, and that was the end of the story. Very short story. And then I got a little more ambitious. I had been reading the Chronicles of Narnia, and I'd been playing a video game called Larn, a roguelike where you dive through a dungeon and fight monsters and everything. And so I write a story that is basically just like me going down and adventuring and killing monsters and everything, just a good old power fantasy, which I hear is enough to be a major anime series these days. You don't even, you can just be the hero going, killing monsters, getting stronger, killing more monsters, getting stronger. But back then, that was the pinnacle of writing. And so I fell down a hole to the hole I was born in, went on an adventure. Again, classic childhood writing, nothing gay there. I also, I was a little bit of a strange kid, which might surprise some of you because I think, a pretty well-adjusted adult. And a little bit of an ambitious kid in really dumb ways. Like, I read that Bill Gates had read the entire encyclopedia when he was 8 years old or something, and 10 years old, and this had made it into his biographies. And I'm sitting there as an 8-year-old thinking, I need something that can make it into my biography. What if I count to 1,000,000? And so I sat down and spent the next month just grinding out every moment of every day in my head. I'm muttering numbers to myself, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just counting up to 1,000,000, right? And I'm recording progress as I go. I'm it isn't very fun, but you got to do what you got to do. Later on, as I'm growing up, I'm getting serious about things, and I look around and I'm I want to do something that has not been done before. Something world-changing. And as many kids like that say, I'm this is not a passing dream, and I flank my name with stars. These things, none of these are anything exactly to do with gayness or anything, right? They're just, I need to give you an idea of what I was like before puberty, before some of these things started changing. I attempted a novel in 5th grade called The Avenger. It was a great story about a boy who meets a dragon, and they pair bond together and then go on adventures around a fantasy landscape. I had just read Aragon. Nothing to do with that. I just thought that dragons were cool, and a boy going on an adventure with a dragon is cool. And so I wrote myself as Kaj Nyapsed, an elf boy going on an adventure with a dragon. Then I got a family website. Like my uncle created a website for my family, and we all started chatting on there, and I just sort of took it over immediately. Like I had needed some space to let all my thoughts out, and so I'm this just 10-year-old kid hopping on and just spamming this forum like mad. Just like everyone else would post combined less than me at some points, and I could just be every moment of every day, I'm like, finally I have somewhere to post. I'm just going to immediately just start spamming this. But this was the first time I found a mention of gay in my archive. So one of my aunts mentions to another of them, may all your pregnancies be blissful and gay. And I hop in, and I'm like, I'm hoping you meant the real gay, happy, and not the meaning that I think never should have been added to the dictionary, gay. But I'm pretty sure it's the first one. Now, is it gay to be obsessed with the meaning of the word gay? No, of course not. I was a devout Mormon kid who was offended by gay people, as any good person is. And so I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood where the boundaries were. Anyway, as I got a little older, I started becoming obsessed with evil. And this is something that surprised me. As I'm remembering, I always loved wolves. I always thought they were powerful and wild and cool and compelling and everything. Suddenly, I find my first story that mentions wolves. And it was written when I was 12 years old for NaNoWriMo because I wanted bonus points in an English class. And suddenly in that story, my first mention of wolves, I'm like making a hierarchy of fantasy races. And I'm lucky I had fantasy in there because otherwise this would be a very different presentation. But, I'm like, humans, obviously good. They're the ones making the list. Dragons, well, humans call them evil, but they're just misunderstood. And I'm like, then I got to werewolves. And I'm like, the werewolves, just irredeemably evil, just awful, just like twisted parodies of humans and just evil wolves. And this is in part because I was raised on a pretty rich diet of fairy tales, of fantasy, of just old stories. And wolves are always the villains in the old stories. And somehow, because I had grown to love wolves so much, I had forgotten that my earliest associations with wolves and the earliest ways that I used them were as villains in stories. Anyway, soon after that, one of my friends introduced me to a Pokemon forum. And this was the first time I had access to some place outside of my family forum to spam people with my thoughts and everything. And so pretty quickly, I took over this forum and again started spamming all over it. Like I was a hyperactive poster. I found the forum games section and would just spend hours going through and replying to all these really mundane threads, just diving through and, would you rather this or 3-word story that. And I made a friend on these forums pretty early on. And we would go back and forth in these forum games, and we would chat all the time, and he would bug me to get on Messenger and everything. And then at some point in one of these forum game threads, I had my next encounter with homosexuality, and I did not like this encounter. Because suddenly my good friend, who I'm getting along with, and suddenly I have a friend online and someone to bounce my thoughts off, and I was a pretty lonely kid. Suddenly I have this person who meant quite a bit to me at the time. He's like, what do you think of bisexuality? And I answered like any good Mormon kid would. I'm like, I don't like it. And then I moved on and I just start asking completely other questions. I'm like, we've settled that. We've covered it. And he pauses and he's like, wait, what's wrong with it? I'm like, it creeps me out. Which I thought was a very normal answer to give about bisexuality because everyone is Mormon. Everyone understands that gay people are gross and bisexuality is bad. And it's creepy and weird. And then he goes into DMs and we have a longer conversation. He figures out that I think homophobia is more natural than homosexuality. And he presses on this and, it becomes this really complicated and for me a very uncomfortable conversation where suddenly I'm being pressed to defend this thing that I felt very strongly about but didn't know why. And I'm like, I think heterosexuality is more natural and homophobia is like that. And homosexuality it's unnatural, it's weird, it's bad. Anyway, eventually he figured out that I was LDS, and he was actually really gracious about it. He maintained the friendship, and he just kind of understood that I was a dumb kid about this stuff. And we went on. But something about that, like, seems to have um, landed in my head. And pretty soon, a little bit after that, I'm in church. And I am walking past after the regular church meeting and looking like the back of the church where this boy about my age is playing piano. It's this boy with deep red hair and a sharp jaw who's playing this angelic piano music in the back of the church here. And I'm like, wow, I want to be this boy's friend. Now, is it gay to want to be another boy's friend? Obviously not. But what happened, right, is I think about this and think about some other things, and a lot of like tense things are going through my mind. I don't know exactly what, but I do know what happened almost immediately after that, which is that I write in my journal, it is time to stop denying the truth and start maturing. After years of pretending not to, I'll say what has probably been obvious to everyone around me. I have a crush on my oldest friend, my childhood friend who is a girl. I want to make the transition from childhood to adolescence. It's been on my mind all day long since the conversation turned vaguely to the subject of crushes. So now I can relax, sort of. I think every heterosexual boy knows this is exactly what they sound like when they're talking about a girl that they're interested in. It is definitely, I think unambiguously, not gay to have a crush on a girl. You know, this pretty conclusively established things. And throughout that month, I'm arguing more and more, making this defense lawyer's case. Here's why I obviously have a crush on a girl. And then sometimes, like, this boy slips in, the redheaded boy, and I'm like, Connor, he came to math circle, finally. It's interesting how much we're alike. And I'm like, I usually consider the best part of my day to be when I'm talking to Vivian. Today, though, the best part was when I was talking to Vivian and Connor on the way to math circle. And then, I move on and don't think much about it. Like, it's not gay to, like, be really interested in talking to this guy and to think, like, you're a lot alike and to be interested and so forth. Anyway, a couple of months after that, something must have gotten to my head because I really needed to demonstrate that being gay is a sin. And I needed to show these gay atheists who swore a lot, and all that made me very uncomfortable on this Pokemon form that I enjoyed, that I understood where the lines between righteousness and sin were. Now, part of this, I loved my favorite author, Orson Scott Card, at that point, was a brilliant guy who wrote really touching things about boys who had been marked as outsiders from birth and then found schools for people who were all, as special and unique as they were, and went off to save the world and killed something called the buggers that they would later come to love, and then would come to speak for the dead, and then about like girls who would trace woodgrains in rituals in service of a religion that they could not feel but wanted to devote themselves to anyway. Something about Orson Scott Card's writing really spoke to me. And something about his writing on homosexuality really spoke to me as well, because as soon as I found out what my favorite author was saying on homosexuality, I'm like, perfect. I have my arguments. I have my plan laid out. I can go in here. I can go to this site, and I can argue with all these Pokemon kids about why being gay is a sin. And it went very, very badly for me. After a few posts, I back out. I'm like, I don't feel like having half of this forum tell me that I'm an intolerant freaky prude who needs to learn some compassion. Like, you're not winning, right? You guys just, fine. I back out. I'm done. And this was a really traumatic experience for me, actually. I'm talking to my friend who had introduced me to the forum, and I'm like, I might be out of my depth with this, but I'm in it, and now I'm stuck. And then my friend who I had been on these forum games with, he's like, I broke my friendship with you. And I'm like, that's fine. I feel sorry for you because I wouldn't want to be homosexual or bisexual. And like you are, obviously, and that's a bad thing, whatever. And then I like message another guy who had been posting homophobic things on this, and I'm like, just ignore those freaks. And I was not someone who would use extreme language almost any time. This was about the most aggressive thing I had ever said in my life, right? Ignore those freaks. Something about that really got to me because immediately after that, I made a role-playing character. This Absol that's like this shiny Absol with a wound that he would eternally keep open because to heal was to forget. You know, um, and his favorite month was November, and his favorite season was winter. His favorite food was man flesh. Is it gay, by the way, for your favorite food to be man flesh? Obviously not. It's a cool, edgy Absol. Anyway, theme song, I Am a Rock. Like, he's very, just this isolated, didn't need anyone, like, just as edgy as could be, right? And I loved this little character. I played this in a lot of forum things after that point for reasons totally unrelated to this argument that I had just had. Anyway, a year later, I'm sort of in the thick of things, and I figure I need to start this journal that no one can ever, ever, ever read. If you're reading this, stop now. And by the way, if you choose to ignore this, and I'm speaking to all of you, then keep in mind that you are completely betraying any trust that I may have in you. And if or when I find out, it will take months, at the very least, for me to forgive you. Anyway, and then I talk about a lot of very personal things in this, such as a unspecified problem that I had that had intensified and that I didn't want to talk about and didn't want to think about. And if you know teenage boys, and if you know Mormons, and if you know anything like that, then you might be able to guess at what this problem was. But it had nothing to do, and I actually mean this, it had nothing to do with pictures of naked men. I was very careful. I would never, ever look at pictures of naked men. Obviously because I wasn't interested in them, and because it was a sin. But like, I had a very hard boundary there. Never, ever would I do that. Because that would very obviously be gay, which I was not. But I would write about, my best friend. I was like, he would draw these like awesome comic strip pages about the two of us in the Pokemon world. And so I would do it also. And I would like follow all his hobbies and figure out like, he was the one who had introduced me to this Pokemon site. I would like sort of orient my life around him and everything. And then like the next day after this, I would say, by the way, I just talked to my friend Vivian, who I definitely have a crush on and who's a girl, and it's just such a shame that we're not 16 yet, and so as Mormons we can't date until we're 16, and like nothing we can do about this, but like for the record, I have a crush on Vivian. If you're wondering, by the way, this is the last time Vivian will appear in this record, so I'll let you know what happened afterwards. About 2 years after this, she got me 2 movie tickets for my birthday, and my parents kind of nudged me and were like, you know what that means, right? And I'm like, oh, shoot, okay. And so I asked her out, and we went on a very chaste date, and then years later, she came to my gay wedding while she was out as a lesbian. Anyway, the day before I had said all of that and like had this nice, oh, I'm so fond of my friend, whatever, I'm thinking, and I'm like, tomorrow, I'm going to send my thoughts down a controversial lane with my views on homosexuality. And I tear in to the gays, right? Now, is it gay to hate gay people? I would argue clearly not. But I definitely did. I'm asking myself, why is it that I hate homosexual behavior? And I'm racking my 14-year-old brain trying to figure out what are the best arguments I can come up with against homosexuality. And I'm like, they see the act of procreation as pleasure. Pleasure, not a way of bringing people into the world. That's just an inconvenience, just a way to have fun. What a horrible way of thinking. Is it gay to think that it's wrong to have sex for pleasure? I don't think so. I think that's a pretty normal thing. Anyway, immediately after this, I wrote a story completely unrelated to any of these things. I had an idea for a sci-fi short story that I wanted to write. And it was a short story about a virtual reality world with no consequences and no stakes, where everyone was living hedonistic lives and only my character. And every time, this is probably the most embarrassing thing in this archive of very embarrassing things, every time I wrote a story as a young person, I was the main character of the story with a very thin coat of paint over me. Very reliably, it was a self-insert. Anyway, so my self-insert character is being very good and he's studying while everyone else is being hedonistic and nonsensical. And he's approached by bullies, and one of these bullies is wearing a half-wolf appearance. And again, I pause here, because I had vaguely remembered I had written some sort of sci-fi short story here, but this is the second time wolves were mentioned in my archive. And again, I loved wolves. I identified with wolves. I was like, why is the bully the wolf here? But anyway, the bullies were like, yeah, we're going to drag you to these degenerate parties. And my character was like, look, I know what goes on at those parties of yours, and I would rather stay here and study. Um, is it gay to want to study instead of going to degenerate parties? Definitely not. Thank you. Um, and I don't think anything more could or should be read into any of that. But a few months after that, that story didn't really stick. I wasn't really, like, I kind of wrote it. It wasn't really doing it for me. And recently, my good friend Kirk, who I had written about, and by the way, because I am talking about being gay, I do want to clarify that this friend of mine, he's still a good friend of mine, and this is one part that really was just friendship. I think our friendship was influenced by me being gay, but looking back, we were really close friends. It was very nice, and I think I was very grateful to have a male friend around, but it was always genuinely just friendship. And I mention that in part because what I'm going to talk about in this the story that I proposed to him shortly after he went to a different high school than me. Now, this story, I loved this story as a teenager. This was going to be the thing that got me on the map as a fantasy writer. It was this sci-fi, far post-apocalyptic world where humans lived in like shining, isolated cities that were carefully trying to maintain the technology they had, while all these half-animal tribes were out in the wild around these, pristine, sterile cities. And my character would be a half-wolf from one of these animal tribes who wore nothing but a loincloth and had no interest in the opposite sex and thought that the purpose of life was to kill or be killed. And his character would be Catman on a revenge quest. We would both be banished from our tribes and go out into the forest together, and we would start a renaissance together. And the last thing I wrote in this story was a scene in which my character is laboriously carrying his character up a cliff. Now, is any of that gay? No, I don't think so. Exactly. Good friends. But at the same time, sorry, why is everyone laughing? Is this gay? So I was collecting a lot of fantasy art around this time. And I noticed that I really liked tribal artwork. And there were a lot of like really compelling tribal anthropomorphic characters with really interesting character designs that were just really well drawn. And had nothing to do whatsoever with anything other than aesthetic appreciation. Now, look, clearly, all of these things are just aesthetic appreciation from this gallery. I think that's obvious. But I really liked just going to this gallery for unclear reasons. I'm just like, it's nice to just look at all these nice pictures of wolves and think about this stuff. And, I'm very fond of wolves. And I just am lonely, and these represent my loneliness, what have you. And then I set my phone background. And I'm like, this is one of the pictures that really speaks to me. Like, there's just something about this picture. Now, I know what you're thinking. Rainbows, gay. Absolutely not. Rainbows are from God. And I was not going to let the gays steal the rainbow. Anyway, and so then I really hit a wolf phase. And so I wrote all these stories and poems and everything focused on wolves. And suddenly they had gone from being these terrible monsters to suddenly something I very deeply identified with. On this, suddenly I'm like going and walking at a zoo across from a wolf and just like dreaming of going out into the wild and being free there. I like write this 2-voice poem about someone who like loves wolves, hates them. These are for a school assignment. And then another assignment, I had this recurring fantasy of just escaping out into the wilderness, just leaving home, just running away from everything and just getting out of there. And just this terror of living a regular life and living a mundane, having a job, staying in wherever I was and just growing old without leaving and escaping. And just this perpetual escape fantasy. My favorite song was this song by the band Sonata Arctica called The Cage, about a wolf trapped in a cage that runs out to the wild. I don't think there are any hidden messages in any of these things. I don't think there's anything more to read into than I liked wolves. I liked the image of wolves in cages escaping into the wild. I don't think there's anything else there. But I needed to keep staking out ground on an important question, which is, even though I had been really burned on the question of gay marriage, I still needed to let people know that being gay was a sin. And so every year or so, I would pop into whatever new forum I'm on, like a Minecraft forum, and be like, by the way, don't like gay people, don't want to talk about it. or on Reddit. The next year, I would pop into Reddit, and I'm like, by the way, don't like gay people. I know you're going to get mad at me at that. Not going to elaborate on it. I've learned my lesson. Bye. No, these are on old accounts. By the way, I'm like self-doxing almost all of my internet history. So if sleuths want to see what I was up to as a teenager, fair warning. Anyway, is it gay to have a bare-chested werewolf character for D&D? Of course not. Thank you. And I made this werewolf character that I was born in the city where my regular family was trying to be normal like everyone else, and I felt like I needed to escape to the wild and feel the pulse of the wild in me. So this was my D&D character as a teenager, right? And eventually, I finally worked up the courage to have a proper conversation about homosexuality. And this was a big step for me. When I'm 18 now, I'm like, it's time to grow up and really talk about why. I understand that, this crass homophobia of my early years. I'm not going to do that anymore. But, gay marriage is nonsensical. And so I went online and argued a lot about gay marriage being just nonsensical. Then I hit my LDS mission. And for those who don't know the details of LDS missions, you spend 24 hours a day around another young man, and you are going out doing literally everything together. You are assigned together. You don't pick them. And out on this mission, I've had a rough go of it the past few years. I was really a miserable teenager in a lot of ways. I just didn't feel like things were going well for me. I wasn't sure why. I was just unhappy. And on the start of my mission, I'm like, I'm really going to turn things around. The first few months of my mission were really, really hard. I was with companions that we just didn't get along very well. The work was going poorly. I'm like, I don't really even know if I believe in this. Then I met someone. I'm like, this companion of mine, he's incredible. I feel intimidated and excited. I'm incredibly comfortable around him. I have no reservations about being myself around him, which is huge because I have almost never been myself around anyone. He's learned a lot about me. Luckily, he isn't completely horrified of who I am. I care deeply about him as a missionary companion, as a friend. And then as I'm learning some of his struggles and everything, I reach to one of the deepest loving laments in the Bible. I'm like, oh, my son Absalom, Absalom, my son. Would God I had died for thee, oh, Absalom, my son, my son. Now, is writing any of that about another man gay? No, I don't think so. No. It was an inspired missionary companionship.
Maybe a musical about.
But so anyway, my mission was hard for me. And after he left, I was really despondent and I couldn't really figure out why. And things just weren't going well. And I was writing why can't I just be happy? And writing, we wear the mask that grins and lies in my journal. And writing in coded script, this is not what I want out of my mission or of my life. Next to the logo of that story, Rebirth, that I was telling you about, running away with my friend into the woods and starting a renaissance. And I don't think any of that has anything to do with being gay. It was just I was despondent about the truth claims of Mormonism. Anyway, eventually I figured out, after I came home from my mission, I'm like, I figured it out. I know why I feel like an outsider all the time. I know why I feel like I have some deep secret. I know why I just have something I need to get off my chest. And I'm like, I have a high IQ and that makes me lonely. And at the same time, the very same week that I wrote this post about how I'm so smart and it makes me so lonely, I had an idea for a new D&D character. Is this gay? I don't think this character is gay. I think I was just maybe a little flamboyant, but yeah, there we go. Anyway, so after that, for purely intellectual reasons, I left Mormonism. This is when the Tracing Woodgrains that you all know came onto the scene. I wrote, again, talking for purely intellectual reasons as an asexual, very confidently, sexuality matters not at all to me, looking at the intellectual questions around the Book of Mormon. I wrote one thing in this series, sexuality is one of those issues I never really learned how to handle. I personally consider myself asexual, and I've only observed it all from a distance. Anyway, I start having conversations with this gay friend of mine around this time. And I start talking to him, and I'm like, it took me a long time to realize there's nothing wrong with nothing wrong about homosexuality. As far as I can tell, I'm asexual, but I honestly don't know. Might just be me not knowing what to do with that sort of emotion. I feel romantic or sexual urges, but not really directed towards anyone. And these were things that I had kept very close to my chest my entire life. I'd never talked about these. And he discussed like the idea of a front stage where you're playing your expected roles and a backstage where you can just be yourself. And I'm like, I've never had a backstage in my life. And that's how I felt at this point. Anyway, then I needed to study Chinese. And so I found this game that looked appealing for Chinese language study. And it was called Nekojishi. And I'm talking to my gay friend about it, and he's like, this is a yaoi furry game? And I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. And he's like, oh, you've been reading it? And I'm like, yeah. Now, you might think, is he thinking about being gay at this point? Well, I have a contemporaneous letter to my mission president. And I'm talking about it, I feel like my mind is being torn in two. The best analogy I can find is to that of gay members of the church, where they feel like fundamental parts of themselves are at odds. I feel that way with my mind, like because I couldn't rationalize all the details, all the truth details of Mormonism. I'm like, I feel like a gay Mormon because I can't rationalize the truth details of Mormonism. Like I feel somehow fundamentally broken, like my mind and faith would forever be at odds, that my mind is torn in two. Anyway, happy ending. I left. I started dating men. I married a man. But even after this, and this is during a time when a lot of people had started reading my writing. I'm giving a self-introduction. And I'm like, I never noticed attraction to men growing up. And I suffered no trauma from my faith stance on homosexuality. And I'm like, look, it's messy. I will forever be unweaving peculiar tangles in my mind. And I came up with a pretty elaborate theory about this. Like I had a strict upbringing. I needed some sort of outlet. I was glued to the computer. And so I was channeled during a sensitive developmental period towards wolves and everything. Anyway, I think that it's a lot simpler than I was trying to make it all. I think I was gay. I think I was gay, and I did not want to be gay. No evidence whatsoever, but anyway, I slowly realized as I was going through this archive, I was like, I think my whole self-narrative about how I got to where I got to was wrong. And when I thought sexuality was a teeny part of my life that I had completely segmented off and had nothing to do with what I wrote and nothing to do with my hobbies and nothing to do with my interests and nothing to do with my distaste for hedonism and nothing to do with my aesthetic tastes and my appreciation for tribal werewolves and everything, nothing to do with any of that, I think that I've been organizing my whole life around a void that I would not look directly at. And I think I was repeatedly, ever since that time, I sat down and wrote that I was having a crush on my friend, a girl. I think I was playing the defense lawyer in my own mind without realizing it against the idea that I was gay until only a few months ago. And then I looked back to that first story that I had written, the one about diving down into a hole, everything. And I'm like, I had been smashing keys and coming up with monster names and everything. And I'm like, oh, a gay something, something, something fur. That was one of the monsters I came up with. Anyway, when I realized all of this, I had some things to say about it, and I will have many more things to say about it many other times. But I don't think any of those things were actually gay. That's all. Oh, by the way, one more thing. My username, Tracing Woodgrains, I chose because, I was really thoughtful about the pursuit of truth, what have you. Like I was trying to decide between religion and not religion. And that character who traces Woodgrains in that book wrote, those who watch me see that the path of the gods is straight. Well, I dwell in a world with no straightness in it.